All right. Hello, and nice to see you all again. This is a very special occasion. This is the first time we brought in someone from outside to be a commentator for Underground Sound, the first of many, we hope. And because it's been House Month, the first person I thought of to join together some of the threads we've been talking about is Kwame Sappho, aka DJ Funk Butcher, a DJ, producer, label head of the Houseology label, a veteran of London's house music scene, and also a commentator. He's done some very interesting discussion and commentary on the music scene in the UK and worldwide, most prominently with the blackout takeover of Mix Mag in the wake of Black Lives Matter protests and lots of questions asked about representation within dance music. It was a huge project and ongoing, I believe. So Kwame, welcome.
Thank you, Joe. So it's an honour to be here, really.
It must be an interesting time to be in house music, and especially as someone who's dealt with the race and class and other representation issues within house music for a very long time. A lot of this is coming to a head right now.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and it's interesting, and obviously it's going to be quite triggering for some aspects of the house community, because they don't know how genuine this attention is at the moment. It feels there's always kind of a cynical nature which permeates through the underground side of the house music scene, because they've got an understandable distrust of the way mainstream music has sort of picked them up and put them back down again. So you've got one half which is really, really happy and excited, and you've got the other half which is looking kind of side-eye. What's this all about?
Yeah, and I mean, obviously it's one of the core features of house music is that it's underground and its mainstream are actually never that far apart, that it's always had influence on the charts, it's always kind of been part of pop culture, but it also has this very deeply involved underground community. So those kind of moments come along quite often, but they don't come quite as big as Drake and Beyonce.
Yeah, I mean the Drake and Beyonce situation, and the timing of it as well, because obviously it would have to suggest that the people around them, the teams around them, the labels, the writers, and so on and so forth, have had conversations about this genre, this particular sound being the direction to go in, from a mainstream perspective, from a radio perspective, from a commercial perspective, which is quite exciting. And it's exciting because part of the battle you have to face as an underground producer or a house producer trying to get a crossover record is trying to justify the commercial viability of the stuff that you do, that it can work on mainstream radio. So now, because we can kind of point the finger at the wall, at the poster of Drake and Beyonce and go, look, they're doing it, so why can't we? It just makes those conversations a little bit easier. There does seem to be an issue with some tier of A&Rs which respond to viral trends, which is kind of, it affects us really, because we have to wait until something goes viral before we're ever in the conversation. And now house is viral, albeit through the help of platforms such as TikTok, and the youth of today. It's kind of put things in a really interesting space.
Whereas, of course, house is the opposite of viral, really. It's almost 40 years old. This is like, people don't grasp, but those first kind of proto house records in New York and Chicago were really like 1983, 1984. Let's get to the crux of it, though. Why now? What are the threads that have fed into not just mainstream, but mainstream Black artists in the USA feeling that this is now for them?
I think, again, it's a really complicated cocktail of technology, timing, the social conversation at the moment, the socio-economic situation at the moment. They've all played a heavy part into these records, and I'd say probably more so Beyonce's record kind of leading the kind of the drive, as it were, in regards to both of the two mainstream cuts. But the foundation of those things came from Black communities that never turned their back on house. So that's why it's quite triggering when some of the articles lead with the title of house resurgence or house renaissance or so on and so forth, which is quite disheartening for those who have never turned their back on the genre. They've always been playing it, no matter whether or not they were putting on events at 50 capacity and only 5 people were turning up. Those are the kind of the foundation of which those mainstream artists have had to draw on. Now, there's a nuance which has to be understood, because Drake and Beyonce making these records is very different from, let's say, Daft Punk making house, right? And Daft Punk, which obviously would have drawn their influences from the Parisian house scene and so on and so forth, and everyone that kind of operated in France. It's Beyonce and Drake drawing from this a cohort of house producers and house community, which isn't widely celebrated within the house world itself. So that's the house dances in South Africa. It's Baltimore, it's Chicago, it's the London underground house scene. It's those sorts of communities which have sort of just been bubbling for years. And I use that term bubbling because they never really hit a temperature which would generate another layer of sort of financial investment or social investment. So those communities were always bubbling for like the best part of 25 to 30 years. And they had very strong loyal fan bases, whether you're looking at from a space of the kind of that US/UK house scene, which puts on events like Back to 95, and you'd hear Todd Edwards back and forth, and he's always sort of had a really close association with the London Black house community and so on and so forth. But it's that community per se which has contributed to the Drake and Beyonce timing of it.
Absolutely. I mean, can we talk a bit more about South Africa? Because I think this is just fascinating. About 8 years ago, I think, when I was working at the Boiler Room, I did a retrospective about South African house because they were going out there, and I got a South African journalist to tell the story. And you know, I knew that there was great South African deep house music, but I had no idea until then just how etched it into the country it is. It's like they sell more house records per head of population than anywhere else in the world. A Belgian friend of mine who makes deep house was getting tracks licensed on illegal compilations, bootleg compilations, but they were tracking him down and paying him because they sold so many, and they wanted to build a good relationship with the artists because they bring all these UK, US, really like musically sophisticated house people out to South Africa where they're treated like gods. And now, of course, that's blown up into the Amapiano sound, which has kind of sent it global. I mean, did you have much involvement with South African artists and the scene out there?
I didn't. I mean, the most I sort of dealt with from a South Africa perspective is when, from a UK slant, we were playing Afro House and we were playing Soulful House. And that was as early as 2004 to 2005. That's sort of the beginnings of what became UK funky here, was the sort of the inspirations from US Soulful House, broken beat, and all these other sort of influences, tribal sounds, which were kind of like very percussive instrumentations and whatnot. But what we didn't know, for obviously sitting in London, was at the time a lot of US acts were actually relocating and moving to South Africa, because for them that was sort of like the Mecca. They US acts that were making house, vocalists, were finding it a lot easier to sell their records once they were in a community where it wasn't 10% of the market that was into house. It was literally like 90% of the market that was into house. So some people from the UK actually relocated to South Africa as well. So this was before, I guess, even the more mainstream popularity of people like Black Coffee was starting to have an effect here. There were trickles of people saying that this is for house, for soulful, for Afro influenced soulful. This is where it is. If you're sort of moving away and you're getting deeper than someone like Quentin Harris and so on and so forth, South Africa is the spot for you. So when we began to kind of see that migration there, it was really intriguing. But I guess from a London perspective, a lot of Londoners were still dubious as to whether or not this was a fad. Did they have the real infrastructure to take it on and maybe rival like an Ibiza? We wanted it to happen. We wanted South Africa to grow to a point where it has the level of esteem that Ibiza has, where if you want to go hear something more tech related and more industrial and sort of harder, rough around the edges, then maybe Ibiza is your thing. But if you something more earthy and natural and percussive, and you'd go to kind of South Africa. And it seems like now, whether like 15 years on kind of thing, it seems like it's getting to that point where they've got some huge superstars coming out. They've got Grammy Award winners coming out of there. They've got people like Black Coffee, who's contributed to the Drake album as well. And that's going to make things a lot easier for everyone who comes after from that South African house scene, Amapiano, Gom, all those sorts of offshoots of Afro that was the most popular sound. And I think you sort of break down the sounds in South Africa based on the generations as well. I think generationally, Amapiano is like the younger brothers of those who were making Afro house, and then you kind of got Gom and all that. So you're sort of having that similar effect of what house was in the UK, and then you got UKG, which was kind of like the younger brothers who their older brothers had left school and had gone raving, and you got UKG, and then after UKG you've got their younger brothers who are into the funky and all that kind of stuff. So you're kind of having that same sort of generational link to the transitions of the genres in South Africa. But the encouraging part is that if they're building this momentum over time, then the South African house scene as a whole of the continent of Africa, it can have some real bargaining power from a music infrastructure perspective. I really want to just see some huge festivals being put out there, international artists going to South Africa, and then likewise those South African artists traveling and coming to Europe, North America, South America, and so on and so forth, and really exporting the sound.
It seems to be that it's come via West Africa as well. Like a lot of Nigerian and Ghanaian DJs and like Nigerian and Ghanaian British DJs have picked up on Amapiano really dramatically. I can think of shows on London stations that previously played all West African Afro beats and are now 50-50 or even playing all South African type sounds. And then there's a whole infrastructure around Afrobeats which connects to the US urban industry. So that presumably cements the actual structures that are there for promoting and communicating about the music.
Yeah, I mean, the kind of the umbrella term at the moment of Afro pop, which is kind of like Afro swing, Afro beats, Amapiano, Afro house, all these different variations of African influenced dance music coming from the continent. It's really interesting because when you're in London per se, or just the UK per se, the DJs here, from my experience and myself, we've never really played with the purist sensibilities. We've always played based on what is good, what we feel like, and that sort of helps the cross-pollination of audiences. So you'll get, at our age, you'll get a broken head, you'll get a funky head, you'll get a garage head, you'll get someone into Afro, you'll get someone from Ghana, Nigeria, South Africa, and that will be reflected in the DJs in the UK. People like Jules, people like Karen, gosh, so many, it's a name, people like IC, you name it. There's so many amazing UK DJs that draw in influences from wherever the continent is, as long as it fits in with the overall narrative of their set, right? And that really helps sort of sometimes territorial politics, which can happen with genres, where I've witnessed from a perspective of some DJs be quite restrictive over the stuff geographically they want to play, because they're trying to build an environment, a community, but in doing so, they're not seeing the bigger picture of who they can bring on board to the sound and what sort of new offshoots can be learned. But I've always felt personally that London DJs who are immersed in this multicultural environment and the different musics, and their timeline on their social media is kind of populated with all different styles and influences, that sort of permeates into their DJ sets and so on and so forth. So
that's house music. I mean, that is London. London has this connection right from the very beginning, like even before ecstasy and acid house. Londoners were connected to Chicago and Detroit and New York, and were making the pilgrimages and buying the records and stuff. So there's an unbroken lineage to the roots of house here. And house is, and always has been, tech, like, you know, drum machines, hard kind of sounds, but also soul and the church, the black church, that gay disco sensibility, and Latin, like, you know, the Latin influence was always huge as well, which, you know, there's always been Afro and Latin within disco and then house. So naturally, it's got that kind of ball of influences that way back to the early 90s to the 80s, people would be playing, you know, a few soulful tracks and then an acid tune, and that's contained within the entirety of house.
And I think that's exactly what I'm alluding to, is the fact that even from a US perspective, they were taking parts from Chicago, New York, Detroit, West Coast. They were using stuff which was a bit soulful. Then you would hear like the 303 in some of their stuff as well. So they were, and I think that is the beauty of house music per se, and why I always predominantly call myself a house DJ, because I don't know which part of the house spectrum I'm going to draw from to entertain the crowd that's in front of me. And I would hate to feel like, oh my gosh, I've called myself this, but there's this amazing track over here on this side of the house world which doesn't fit into my set because I've made it a bit too restrictive. I always like the freedom to kind of expand beyond that, and that's the beauty of house and its production. So when you talk about the Latin influences and the Afro influences, it's masters at work. It's Todd Terry and it's Louis Vega and Kenny Dope, and they taking their lived experiences of music and they're putting them together. One person's maybe more soulful and Motown influence, and one person maybe more Latin percussive, and just amalgamating those styles and just getting this incredible music.
And that's exactly why it still has this validity as a creative crucible for putting things together in. You know, it may sound like it's kind of predictable, but every person brings a new kind of twist that is personal to them into that pot. How do you feel? Are you optimistic now that this kind of mainstreaming of seeing Black house DJs and producers as the norm, and seeing, like, I think the videos, watching Amapiano videos over the lockdown changed a lot of people's perceptions, because they were seeing young Black crowds dancing to what is essentially house music. I think that kind of flicked a switch for a lot of people. How do you feel that that's going to affect the house mainstream, which, you know, is still overwhelmingly European and white?
Yeah, that's a really interesting question. I think we need to deep dive into that, because what it represents is, for some people, a level of frustration, because those Amapiano videos of largely young Black kids dancing to house, they've always been there. There's things that I've always experienced. There's things that you've always known, Joe, that those communities have existed. But because they wasn't represented in the mainstream perspective of who is the house audience, it was always believed that there was no market for house in that territory geographically, or that territory demographically. So that's probably leads into why the building of infrastructure in those places, with those Black house DJs, with those Latino house DJs, with those LGBTQ house DJs and producers, and so on and so forth, has been a lot slower in comparison to white male house DJs, which kind of dominate a lot of the top tens and whatnot around the genre. So what that means is that there isn't going to be as much as an obvious enthusiasm with this sort of new spotlight at the moment, because people are going to be like, why now? Like, what's the catch here, kind of thing. And I'm personally optimistic, only because the way I'm designed, I can kind of see the opportunities in this, but I wouldn't take away from the fact that those who have a level of distrust as to the gaslighting which happened in the music industry, in regards to people who are constantly putting on parties year after year after year and packing it out with Black faces, and not just Black faces and non-Black faces that were comfortable attending these raves as well. So there obviously was a real sort of, it wasn't ghettoizing this sound. This was music from a Black lens, which everyone felt comfortable attending, if you could find it on, I guess, the Resident Advisor events page as to if it was going on. But that's the only thing that you had to kind of struggle against. So it's just trying to kind of manage those feelings, because obviously music is very personal for someone. So the moment you sort of get that feeling of, oh, I'm recognized now, you're hit with another feeling of, as to, why am I recognized now when I've been doing this for like best part of 25 to 30 years for some people, kind of thing. So I'm just optimistic that this sends people down a rabbit hole, because I tweeted with the whole Drake and Beyonce thing that if this sends someone down a rabbit hole to find Kerry Chandler, oh my goodness, that's amazing. So, and that's the beauty of it, because that's what happened with me and jazz music. I found jazz through hip hop, through the samples, and I'm looking, and I was just like, oh, I love this. And through Jamiroquai and listening to even different jazz acts, through hearing more mainstream interpretations of the funk sound and all that kind of stuff, it sends you down a rabbit hole if you never grew up listening to those sounds in particular in your kind of like your formative years. So that's the dream of it, that this sort of sends people down that rabbit hole when they find, quote unquote, the real stuff.
And with 40 years worth to discover, that's a treasure trove. So yeah, I envy anyone getting into that for the first time. For you, what's next for you? I mean, you know, you say you like to spot opportunities. I mean, I guess you're doing some more with Mixmag, is that right? So I presume that'll be a chance to get deeper into the same questions we've been talking about here.
Yeah, I think the Black music space, the electronic music space, has a lot to teach, has a lot to educate as to what has been going on, because clearly there's been a gulf in information. So it's about populating the space I've been given at Mixmag with information, not just pertaining to the fact that Black producers, Black DJs kind of interpret house music in an amazing way. We know that already. It's all this other layer as to what's happened to Black music producers from an earning potential, what's happened from a marketing potential, Black women in music, the LGBTQ community in house music, which is like anyone who knows their house history, and not to shame people that don't. House comes from the Black, gay, and Latino communities. House is the name of the venue, the warehouse. Garage, this comes from a venue, the garage kind of thing. And these were safe spaces, dancing spaces for those communities. And over a period of time, they've sort of been erased. So there's all this sort of unlearning to kind of get back to a place where you're finding a much more honest representation on the dance floor, which kind of set pace with the whole genre. And it's about sort of kind of poking that stubborn bear through my features and getting some like really kind of prominent figures in their respective spaces to ask those questions as to why are we here. And it's a rhetorical question.
It's not just worthy either. It's not just a matter of lecturing and digging for information, because the appreciation of the music is so much greater when you understand its like fundamental purposes and where it came from. So
exactly,
house music is about joy, and like that comes from those struggles and everything around them.
Yeah.
Is there more music for you coming up?
Oh yes, I mean I've got a ton of music on my hard drive. I'm still putting out stuff as we speak on Houseology, but I'm also in that in-between stage of trying to use the opportunity to kind of platform my house music and present it in a way which is sort of educational and thought-provoking and ties into that messaging which is in house music, because like you said, it is about joy, but like you said, it's about understanding the nature of that joy. The joy is sort of repurposed pain, which has kind of been rejiggled, and that's not just with house music. That's blues, that's hip hop. There's always some sort of message which has come from a place of despair, frustration, and then it's just like, okay, well, I'm going to make this out of it. So I'm in the moment of, I'm in the midst with some of my team at Houseology to try and platform my music, my catalog, the stuff that we represented, and find partners on board and just kind of push forward with a platform which, when people go out and they rave to the music, they understand where it's coming from, as well as having a good time.
Brilliant. Well, I'll put some links to your stuff down in the description for this video, and I really appreciate your time, Kwame. It's always a pleasure, and hopefully we'll be able to continue this conversation and actually play some music in public with Underground Sound, because we're going to be doing quite a lot of activities later in the year. So you will be very welcome to join some of them.
Brilliant. Thank you very much.
Nice one. Thank you.
Cheers, Joe.